Welcome to the FMCG guys, in alliance with the CPG guys in the US. Data is a hot topic everywhere, and FMCG is no different. But which data actually matters? Is too much data a bad thing? How can we choose the data that will actually be useful to commercial organizations?
Daniel, I think this is a question that a lot of FMCGs and retailers are challenged with these days. I've read an interesting stat in the past that says that 90% of the data available in today's retail environment was produced in the last 2 to 3 years, which just goes to show you how much more data is currently available. So to your point about is too much data a bad thing? Personally, my experience has been that I don't think we've ever suffered from lack of data. I think it's what you do with that data that really matters. And I think ultimately that's what the real challenge is for a lot of us in this FMCG retail space.
In order to better understand how FMCG leaders, especially in the commercial area, can maximize the potential of data, we've invited Jo Campbell, Senior Vice President at eFundamentals, a leading digital shelf analytics agency. Hi, Jo. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Daniel. Hello, friend. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
Jo, just so the audience and ourselves a little bit as well get more acquainted with you, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you're currently doing at eFundamentals?
So I'm Jo Campbell. I am the Senior VP of Operations at eFundamentals. I joined eFundamentals in January 2020. Interesting time to join because obviously it was just before the world fundamentally shifted on its axis. And I started in a kind of business development role. So going out, talking to businesses to understand their needs around data and analytics in the e-commerce space. I've now moved into kind of more of an operational role. Prior to eFundamentals, I'm an FMCG girl through and through. So I started my career at P&G, joined their graduate training scheme straight out of university. So I was literally fresh out the box. Awesome training ground in terms of, learning this industry. I was there for 16 years and then I went to Kraft Heinz. I was there for a couple of years. I then took a slight detour, went and set up a mission-driven fintech lender, but really missed my FMCG roots. So came back into eFundamentals, as I say, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it does happen to a lot of people that they leave FMCG and they feel the need to go back pretty soon. So It's not the first time I hear that.
It does tend to pull you back in. I can certainly relate to that, Jo.
Yeah. Although it was interesting, having done the fintech thing made me realise that I really wanted to go into a business that was more around data and technology enabling businesses, which was what attracted me about eFundamentals.
Yeah, I can imagine, like you said, having come from, I can think of few places that are better in terms of, like you said, a training ground at P&G, and then comparing that to your experience at Kraft Heinz. I'm sure you've seen quite a bit with regards to the evolution in this data space in terms of how prevalent it's become and how it's really become, in essence, the lifeblood of the FMCG world. Can you share with us a little bit about what those experiences have been and some of your observations having worked at these various places and industries?
Sure. I mean, when I started at P&G and I started on their kind of sales graduate training scheme, selling was all about relationships. We didn't have a huge amount of data. Yes, there was some, but it was all about going and sitting in front of the buyer and building a relationship with them and convincing them to sell, your brand over your competitors, give it more space in store, walking stores, understanding the physical retail environment. And that's really evolved. I do remember one of the graduates joined my team when I was managing P&G's business with Sainsbury's and said to me, was the internet even around when you joined the company? And I just thought, well, that's charming. I know I'm not young, but I didn't think I was that old. But I do think with the way the internet has fundamentally shifted the world, and then you look at the way that retailers like Amazon really want to manage their business algorithmically, how a lot of media spend is now managed algorithmically. It's meant that having good data so you understand what's going on, but more importantly, them being able to understand the data and take the actions that will drive business performance has become a critical skill. And it's one that all of the clients that we work with are investing a lot of time and money upskilling their organizations to enable them to operate in a much more data-driven world versus just relying on great relationships. I do think ultimately people do business with people, but being able to leverage data to help with those conversations is increasingly critical to success.
Yeah, and you're coming from sales at P&G, or as it used to be called, CBD. How, like, when you're working in a sales role, which is, as you said, typically more linked to like building relationships, selling, you know, like going to talk to people and basically convincing them about something in a way. Now with the analytics, how do you actually choose the right analytic between all the information that you have? What are the data that matters? How do you choose that?
I think it's ultimately about helping people make better, faster decisions. When I was at P&G, one of the projects that I worked actually with our kind of IT function on was building out a suite of tools that would help the sales teams understand what were the critical business drivers. We used to sit in business reviews and there'd be this perennial debate in terms of what drives the business harder. Is it distribution? Is it pricing? Is it average price? Is it share of shelf? So actually bringing a much more data-driven lens to those discussions using advanced analytics in the background, but presenting it in a very easy way for key account managers to understand and then use in their business planning. And that's something that, you know, we're obviously with our business now trying to help people do in the e-commerce space. So I think it's about making it easy for people who may not necessarily be very confident about big data sets, complex data sets, making it easy for them to understand and easy to use in their day-to-day jobs. Because the worst thing that we can do is turn everybody who's in CPG sales, brand management, revenue management into kind of data scientists. We need data scientists to enable them to make it simple and to make it easy to action. And then we need platforms and tools that do the same thing.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned part of the growth process in terms of like data fluency is in getting people confident with it. Like you said, not everybody has to be a data scientist, but you need to be able to at least have some comfort level, some fluency in terms of being able to speak data so that you can work with those individuals in data science to ultimately drive to, in essence, transforming that to what you need. And to that point, and you started to allude this in your previous comment, how do you translate data? What's been your experience in regards to great examples of being able to take data and translating that into action and actual business impact for those sales teams?
I think there's a few things. The first one is being really clear on what are the key business questions that each, I'd say, kind of persona we talk about is grappling with on a day-to-day business, because what a brand manager will be trying to do will be different to what a key account manager will be trying to do, will be different to what a revenue manager is trying to do. So really understanding the persona and their use cases is, I think, the first step. Because I do think FMCGs have an addiction to data, and they just, many of them want to get into the nth degree of detail without having taken that step back to think, how are my teams going to use this to drive business results, rather than I just want to look at a million lines of data out of curiosity. So I think starting with persona, use cases, key business questions is absolutely critical. I think the second element to it, and is something that we try to help our clients do, is almost manage by exception. So if you're managing, for example, pricing, you don't need to know all of the SKUs where your pricing is as you expect it to be. What you need to be able to very quickly identify are the products where the retailer's not executing your pricing strategy as you expect it to be, or where your competitors are doing something with their pricing strategy that you've not seen them do before. So it's that whole management by exceptions piece, which helps people then understand it quickly and get to, okay, what are the things that I need to change to enable my business to perform better?
Mm-hmm. Is it a bit like the case of like general news information where sometimes you have the feeling that we get so much information that we don't know anything? Can it create like that kind of effect as well, like having too much data?
I think absolutely. And I guess I'll share a kind of actually recent example that we had with one of our clients, which was they were tracking number of search terms within their specific category. And their share of search was looking incredibly strong. So they're all high-fiving themselves going, we're doing a brilliant job. But it wasn't moving the needle at all on their business performance. And the reason was because they were tracking search terms that nobody uses to find the products in that particular category. And so that's why we always come back to what's the use case, what's the objective that you're trying to achieve, and then what's the right data set that helps you do that. So yeah, that's just one tiny example. I think you're right, Daniel, in terms of, people not being able to see the wood for the trees.
Yeah, well, it sounds a bit like when you have a piece of fake news and you don't actually benchmark it against other stuff, no? Like you see a video of something and it gets put it out of context totally, and you need to actually put things into context, no, to actually see things for what they are.
Yeah.
I would add to that we used to use this term. It's a bit of a boil the ocean exercise as well, which is that you have so much data that unless you've got that use case or that persona as your point of entry in regards to what is the key business question, as you said, that I'm trying to answer, it's very easy to then get lost in the data. And sometimes, like you said, it can lead you to fake conclusions, right? So similar to your fake news example, Daniel, it's like sometimes, it's just as easy to come to the right conclusion as it is to come to the wrong one if you get lost in that data.
Yeah. And for example, when you're working, Jo, with sales team, how can data empower like salespeople, for example? Like what pieces of data? Is that management by exception that you were referring to? Is there any other key data points that really can help salespeople when talking to a customer?
Well, I think for kind of key account teams with customers, there's a couple of lenses. One is, how can you use data to influence the retailer's strategy so that they're kind of supporting your category vision as a business and ultimately helping your brands win within the category? I think one of the things, and it's been around for ages, but if you consider what's happening kind of geopolitically in the world at the moment, is the pressure on costs on consumer wallets is absolutely huge. And, globally, there's an estimate that about $500 billion is spent on trade promotions. And the common held view is that actually 35 to 40% of that is just the cost of doing business, because if you take it away, your buyer or the retailer is going to feel like you're not investing in them. So how can you be smarter in the execution of your trade promotion strategy to be able to optimize, to improve profitability, whilst continuing to deliver value to consumers who are increasingly having their pockets pinched, and do that in a very effective way? And trade promotions is a huge topic debate, but is one where, we're certainly working with our clients on all aspects of their e-commerce trade spend, their e-retail banner activations, their promotions, really simple things like, so often we see our clients investing in banner ads on promotions that create an out of stock, substitute their competitor's product into that shopper's basket, which then stays in their favorites. So having a way to combine those data points to see it very clearly is incredibly powerful and impactful.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned trade promotion optimization. Given the current environment from an economic volatility standpoint, there's a lot of pundits out there that are looking back to what happened the last time we had a recession back in 2008, 2009. And one of the takeaways that I've read a lot about has been this need to maintain ad spending, but with that, doing it in a much smarter, more effective sort of way. So I think what you're saying, Joe, is spot on with that, which is saying, look, yes, my pockets are getting pinched, right? So I've got smaller budgets to work with, but I need to maintain a healthy level of ad spending, but let me do it in a smarter sort of way. So I know where I should be investing those dollars, right? And like you said, maybe it won't be 500 million, but it'll still be a substantial amount. But let me do that in a much smarter sort of way. So I think that's going to become more and more critical the deeper and deeper we get into the next few years, particularly here in Europe. I did want to ask a follow-up to Daniel's question, which is if you could tell us a little bit more about eFundamentals and maybe perhaps share another success story from one of your clients in regards to how you help companies in the FMCG space address some of the challenges with data that you were starting to allude to.
So I think one of the things that we think differentiates our kind of approach with clients is that hardwired into our DNA is ensuring that our clients make money from using eFundamentals. It's that blunt. So we stand behind all of our contracts with a commitment to deliver our clients a minimum 4 times return on their investment. Actually, last year we delivered on average 12, which when you think about it is a pretty stunning result. I don't think there are that many investment choices that in FMCG you're confident can deliver a 12x ROI.
You don't work with headhunters yet, right?
No.
I'm an FMCG headhunter, if that counts.
But part of our formula for enabling those types of results is that we don't just pipe in the data. What we do is when we're onboarding a new client, we really firstly get under the skin of what are their objectives as a business. And then we develop an action plan for them based on our experience of what drives performance that is completely linked to their business objectives. So if it's top line, there'll be a series of things we'll do. If it's profitability, there's a series of things, or it might be more granular in terms of we want to improve our search performance in Amazon. So we agree the objectives up front, and then we develop the action plan. We review it with them monthly. We point out the key actions that they need to be taking as a business to deliver the results and objectives that they're looking for. And we also work with them in terms of how they embed that into their businesses, rituals and routines. Because if it's just part of their kind of daily, weekly, monthly business planning cycle, whether it's internally or externally with clients, then it's going to get much better adoption. And so it is that kind of secret sauce of making sure that we really understand what they're trying to achieve, building the action plan, embedding it in their ways of working, and then making sure that we're constantly refreshing training for new users. We track things like platform usage. If we see that falling off, it's a red flag, right? We need to make sure that, people are really understanding how to utilize the data rather than just having access to it. And I think, we are very focused on that as a way of operating, because we know that if our clients are making tons of money using eFundamentals, they're going to want to keep working with us. It's a sustainable business growth strategy.
And further to that, is there an example that comes to mind of that actually puts all that together?
There are so many.
and we can leave out the specifics in terms of protecting the innocent if we need to in regards to.
Yeah, it's interesting because we work with, smaller clients who operate in a single category in a single market through to some, kind of really big, I'd say Premier League FMCG companies. And the approach is consistent. I mean, we had one client where, again, it was a really simple thing, but they kind of hadn't seen it in their business. With one retailer in the US, they had about a 50% share of the category, and they had a 5% share of search. And Firstly, the analytics in the platform make that really, really clear just immediately to that key account manager in that account. So then the immediate question is, okay, so what's going on? What do I need to do about it? And it was as simple as they didn't have the key category search term in their product names. So we made the intervention with them, and overnight, I kid you not, overnight, their share of search went from 5% to 60%. And it stayed at about 50 to 60% ever since. Now, you couple that then with the fact that 95% of add to basket comes from page one. And we know that for every percentage increase you have on your average search rank delivers about a 4% increase in sales. You can very quickly see how that type of transformation drops straight into the top and the bottom line for that particular business. And it's those types of actions and insights that we're working through on a daily basis across all of our client base, which is enabling that really strong ROI performance.
That's insane. I didn't know that 95% of purchase came from page one. It just tells you like how super important this is to be in page one.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if you're not on page one, it's like walking a physical store and being merchandised, bottom right of the fixture, which is the point where you turn into that aisle. Nobody sees you. There are a few categories where there's an exception. So wine, typically people will look across a few more pages. But most pages, if you're not on page one, you might as well not be listed.
Yeah. In the same way, probably wine, if I think of like a wine shopping experience in the supermarket, you'd also like spend more time to look at all the wines on the shelf, no? And as I think that this whole conversation we're having, if somebody were to listen to it 10 years ago, it'd probably be like, what are these people talking about? They probably not understand anything. Probably the things that we'll talk about in another 10 years will also sound like a different language if we were to hear it today. What I mean with that is, how do you see things evolving around data in FMCG, data analytics, and its relation to commercial performance and success?
So one of the things that I think we're seeing is, kind of from a data and granularity, it's getting increasingly more complex. If you think about fast delivery, is a good example. So obviously there's a lot of fast delivery apps popping up globally, and some of them just behave like a retailer. So you take a kind of Getir and you see pricing, promotion, what's available, and it's just like shopping any other kind of online retailer. But then you go to somewhere like Deliveroo or Uber Eats, and so we've all kind of trained ourselves to shop by search. Google and Amazon have done a brilliant job of creating that habit in us. But if you go on, kind of an Uber Eats and you are, say, I'm in, Southwest London, and I wanted to buy Cadbury's chocolate bar. I guess chocolate's top of mind with it coming up to Easter, or Cadbury's Easter egg. I put in Cadbury's Easter egg, and what the app returns is not just where I can buy a Cadbury's Easter egg, but the full product assortment in every single store locally where I could buy a Cadbury's Easter egg. So one search result can deliver you 50,000 products. So you then put your kind of key account manager or CPG hat on, and you go, how on earth do I use that data constructively within my business? And again, it goes back to, okay, so what is the use case? Are you trying to look at assortment to influence supply chain? Are you trying to understand pricing? And then finding a way of putting that data in front of clients in a way that makes the action really clear to them. I mean, the fast delivery kind of model is something that we're working our way through at the moment in terms of it's a huge data set, but how do you make it actionable? And I think, all the kind of permutations of delivery models, categories, platforms just makes that whole data landscape even more complex. So we feel that part of our job as a kind of leader in the space is to help our clients navigate their way through that, and for us to bring some thought leadership to the table in terms of the best way that we think they can do that and turn data into action, as opposed to have data just for data's sake.
Because it seems like this will just make everything more and more complex in order to win, and there's more and more things that you'll have to more or less have under control. So I guess that company like eFundamentals, I'm sure it's going to make your job more complicated as well, but you're going to be more important to companies as well. No, companies like yours that can actually bring that intel and guide them through this journey.
Well, and I imagine, like you said, I think that the store format of, let's say, 2030 is going to look, as you mentioned, significantly different than what we're used to today. Same way that we had these quick commerce players come up, there'll be some other iteration, whether it be the small store, maybe it's the large store reinvents itself. And like you said, being able to kind of think about that and the copious amount of data that will come with that, it's going to be a challenge, right? And I think, like you said, companies like yours, like eFundamentals, that can help FMCG brands think through that is definitely something that's going to be needed for sure. Jo, this has been great. I know that I personally have learned a lot. And, I think, Daniel, you alluded to one of the killer facts of many that Jo mentioned and shared with our audience today in regards to the importance of being on that first page, but also the kind of impact that improvement in terms of search ranking can have on your bottom line. For people who want to learn more about eFundamentals and how to learn more about some of these offerings that you guys have, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Is it to
So DM me on LinkedIn, Jo Campbell, or get in touch with us through our eFundamentals LinkedIn page, or just email at hello@efundamentals.com. Be delighted to hear from anybody.
Excellent. Well, I think, like I said, there's definitely a lot of people will benefit from that for sure. Wanted to close out our conversation with one final question, and this is a question that we ask all of our guests, looking at it more from in terms of their leadership experience. So, given your prior experiences throughout your career, if you could go back and give your younger self at the beginning of your career, that the person right out of university who joined the P&G program, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give your younger self at the start of your career?
So when I was in I think it was late 20s, I got a brilliant piece of advice she was the general manager of P&G's beauty care business across Europe, a lady called Jenna Drossos. She probably won't even remember saying this to me, but the advice she gave me, but there's a deeper point underneath it, was, Jo, you've got to remember in life that you catch more bees with honey than vinegar. And the reason it was a really good piece of advice is because when I came into corporate life, and bear in mind, this was a little while ago, there was less of a kind of gender balance. I think we've still got a way to go on that. And I mistakenly felt that the way that I needed to be to succeed was to be aggressive, bolshy, kind of mimicking some of the less positive male behavior that I'd seen in a professional environment. And Jenna's advice really pulled me up by my bootstraps, because not only was she right in the feedback in the moment, but what it made me realize was that I'd been trying to mold myself into something that just wasn't me. I'm actually quite a kind, generous-hearted. I hope people that work with me and know me personally would describe me as that. And I kind of suppressed that part of myself because I thought that wouldn't enable me to succeed. And I'm a massive advocate of believing that diversity delivers better business results. And that's diversity across all sorts of different kind of angles, whether it's, kind of gender, religion, ethnicity, or thinking style. And I've certainly been far more successful since I've gone back to being me and really leveraging my strengths rather than trying to be something that is not me. So to my just out of university self, I would say, Just be you, do it the way that you are, because you know that that's perfectly good enough. You don't need to try and suppress elements of yourself or dial up bits that feel uncomfortable to be successful. And it's something that I try and role model and mentor quite a lot. It's something that I talk to, kind of younger people. I say, just have the confidence to be you and know that you can be successful by being you, because you wouldn't be working somewhere like this if you couldn't do that anyway. So a slightly long answer, but I think it was a brilliant bit of advice, and it's something that I've carried with me ever since.
This was Jo Campbell, Senior Vice President at eFundamentals. Efrain, I felt like I learned a lot about how FMCG leaders can choose the right data to succeed commercially. What are your main takeaways from the conversation?
Absolutely. I really enjoyed hearing from Jo, and I think our audience learned a lot from her comments as well as us. For me, the big takeaways were when she was speaking about how we can drive greater data fluency in our organizations, particularly when you look at it through a B2B lens. She talked about, similar to the way we think about consumer marketing and we think about personalization being a critical element in that space, how could we apply it through a B2B lens as well, in terms of thinking about some of these key business questions and making sure that they're aligned to a key persona and or use case to make them that much more relevant. That I think is a great example of learning from the other side, let's say from consumer, and applying it in a B2B world, which is, I think, to me is always a good idea in terms of where we can learn from other, call it, related worlds, if you will. And to me also, when Jo mentioned the stat in terms of the amount of money that's spent on trade promotions, which I think a lot of us in this space are well aware of, given the budgets that we manage, but the fact that they're able to demonstrate a 12x return on investment for their clients based on that trade promotion and being able to drive that level of optimization is huge. I think that definitely catches everybody's attention for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me as well, like on a leadership perspective, I think that it was great that we asked her about her learnings and what advice she would give to her younger self, because I think what she mentioned about being genuine to yourself, actually being loyal to yourself at the end of the day, I think is super important. I don't know if it's so much from a leadership and career building perspective, but more than anything, I feel like people that are not true to themselves, at some point it gets back to them and it comes back to haunt you if you keep that persona for a long time. So I think that was invaluable advice.
Well, absolutely. And I think about in today's environment, how relevant that is, just not at an individual level, but also at a company or a corporation level as well, in regards to how much more attuned today's consumer is with regards to a company's values,
true,
brand's values, and how it's playing a bigger role and factoring into how we choose to make purchase decisions, right? So I think that's a great learning, like I said, not just from an individual perspective, but also in terms of how we as brand marketers in this space can really think about applying it for our companies and for our brands as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks to all our listeners for joining us again. A shout out also to the CPG Guys, our sister podcast in the US. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.